There she was, singing a song about Ho Chi Minh. What kind of an American dad had I become? Up next on the Crossing Ideas podcast. Welcome to the Crossing Ideas podcast. This is Mark Sasse, author of 12, soon to be 13 novels as I'm closing in on the end of my latest. And you heard it here first. A Vietnamese fantasy novel named Lady Chiu and the Demon Warrior of Hanoi, coming later this fall wherever you buy books. You can check out all my works at www.mwsasse.com. That's MWSASSE.com. Episode 11. My kids sang communist songs and other great ways to grow up. Parents make choices for their kids. If you've had more than one, you know that your choices for them will vary. There's no one-size-fits-all parenting guide anywhere in the universe. But as first-time parents, the choices can seem questionable, even downright silly when you think back upon them. Yes, my child sang communist songs. No, she is currently not a Marxist or a communist. I am not a communist, not even close. But this would be a great attack ad if I ever decided to run for public office, which, let me make it known, I have no aspirations to do. But can you imagine the scenario, though? In a debate, let's say I'm running for a town dog catcher, and my opponent pulls out this tactic. Mark Sasse encouraged his kids to sing songs about Ho Chi Minh when they were growing up. He is a communist in disguise. And furthermore, I have it on good authority that he once had dog meat when he was in Vietnam. He's not qualified to be a dog catcher. He might have ulterior motives for wanting to catch dogs. All right. Yeah, I think I should go into writing attack ads for opposition. Anyways, when we moved to Vietnam in 1994 with a 15-month-old child, we knew it would change the directory of our child's upbringing. But we honestly had no idea what we were getting into. This young kid of mine was outgoing, that was easy to see, and she needed other kids to play with. We lived on campus at the Maritime University, and there was only one other child on campus, a young boy named Bim Bim. And she would get together with him at times, but she needed more. So we enrolled her in the local preschool. She wasn't yet 2 years old. First, imagine the stairs. This is in Haiphong, Vietnam in 1994 to 1995. There just weren't foreign kids with blonde hair in that city. Classroom full of black-haired Vietnamese children and one pale-faced, blonde-haired foreigner. But boy, did they love her. The first benefit was the school potty trained her very quickly. You know, they have methods of doing that. They hold a naked kid by the side of the street and they say, mimicking the sound of someone peeing to help train the kid. I tell you, it works. They train their children very young in potty training. So we bought a bunch of super cheap pajama bottom pants, I guess you could call it, no diapers. And if she went in her pants, well, they'd just clean it and send them home. But she learned very quickly. That was amazing. One of the more strange days a little later on is when I finally realized that my daughter was a good communist. Okay, I exaggerate a little bit, but the first day she started walking around the house singing a song about Ho Chi Minh. You know, Ho Chi Minh, the modern communist leader who helped lead the Vietnamese country to independence against the French and then, of course, against the Americans. I had to shake my head a little bit and give that some thought. You know, I'm a proud American, always have been, acknowledging its flaws and its faults, but there's no place like America in all the good ways. But as she sang about Ho Chi Minh, I could only reflect how different her upbringing was to most every other American kid. All of my kids have a completely unique streak about them because of these unforgettable experiences of growing up in the quickly changing Vietnam of the late 1990s. Here's a bit of a strange bit of trivia that my son could use. Let's say he's at a party. He could stump everyone by asking them to guess what was the origin and destination of his first flight ever. There's got to be just a handful of Caucasian Americans who can claim this. His first flight ever was from Hanoi, Vietnam to Vientiane, Laos. In contrast, mine was from New York to London, which that sounds a little bit more normal for an American. Despite the interesting song choices, which my kids might come home with on occasion, Vietnam really was an amazing place to raise a small child. We trusted strangers. We would go to restaurants, and these aunties would dote over our child, and they would take her for the duration of the meal. She'd come back with an armful of goodies, fruit, candy, chips, bite-sized shrimp chips called Bim Bims. Yes, the same name as the little boy that was her friend at the beginning of the podcast, Bim Bim. There was never any worry about placing our child into a stranger's hands. They would protect her with their lives if they had to. They loved her. And so we would go out for a meal, have the place to ourselves, have the child brought back to us at the end of the meal. Free babysitting. It was amazing. In 1999, we moved to Thanh Nguyen, Vietnam, which is 60 miles north of Hanoi. We lived there for our last 5 years in Vietnam. Our house was on the backside of the university in a small community of modest to meager Vietnamese homes. We quickly got to know the community. Our kids became friends with the local kids, and they would spend hours at our house playing games, climbing trees. It was a fantastic time. My daughter is still in contact with some of her childhood friends there. That's how much of an impact it was on her. When our kids were small, let's say 8, 4, and 2, we even gave them autonomy for breakfast. Here's what that means. Early morning, my eldest would unlock the front door, take her two siblings for a walk down the street, and order breakfast for them. They would sit and eat a variety of treats like bánh cuốn, the steamed rice pancake, or soy, the sticky rice, or phở gà, which is the chicken pho, the noodle soup dish. Each dish would cost no more than 15 cents. Yes, 15 cents for a bowl of pho. All the grandmas and the aunties would take care of them. They watched out for them. And then they would come back home and we might still be in bed. It's almost crazy to think about that now. That's how it was just 20 years ago in Vietnam. Our little kids could bebop down the street on their own and it was perfectly safe. These were little kids. If they weren't where we expected them to be, all we had to do was ask a neighbor and they would tell us where to find them. In the front room of someone's house, being completely spoiled with food and candy, no doubt. I would also plop them onto my motorbike, and me and the three kids would go to the market or someplace local. We didn't worry about helmets on the local trips. My kids' upbringing was filled with the rubber band jump roping, where they get tons of rubber bands, they tie them together into these long strings and created these elaborate ways to jump rope with them. Oh, my kids loved that. Motorbike rides out to the rice fields, swimming hole, a mountain hike to a cave, Vietnamese daycare where they would sing morning songs, eat rice porridge, take naps on these reed mats on the floors, countless bowls of pho and other treats along the Vietnamese streets. My kids would eat boiled snails with their friends late at night. They grew up speaking a second language. They grew up putting fresh mango into freshly made yogurt. My daughter wore an áo dài, the traditional Vietnamese dress. There was even one time that she was on Vietnamese TV singing a Vietnamese song to a Hai Pham TV audience. It was about a bird, not Ho Chi Minh, by the way. She read Vietnamese kids magazines, and one time she entered a contest, and we were all at this big event, and they drew her name, and she won a brand new bicycle. And she beamed proudly as she walked up to the stage, and everyone clapped and smiled and gawked at this blonde haired kid accepting the bicycle in front of this huge audience of Vietnamese. And then, of course, she thanked everybody in their own language, and everybody went ballistic. It was wonderful. It was really an amazing way to grow up. She had become just one of the Vietnamese kids, even though she and all of our other kids looked completely different from whom they played with. I'll never forget one time when we were stateside. We were showing some Vietnamese slides to a group of people. Our daughter had seen these pictures many times over, but on this occasion, she looked closely at the photos and noticed something. Mom, I'm the only kid that doesn't have black hair. She had never noticed that she was different from them. Such a beautiful thing. You know, kids don't see ethnicity. I saw this video recently where pairs of kids from different racial backgrounds were being asked how they were different from their friend. And none of them, not one, mentioned any difference related to skin color or ethnicity. All of them noticed benign things like, oh, he laughs a lot, or I run faster, or stuff like that. It's pretty amazing. This reminds me of an observation made by Thomas Sowell. He said, quote, what can any society today hope to gain by having newborn babies in that society enter the world as heirs to prepackaged grievances against other babies born into that same society on the same day? Sowell contends, and I agree, that two babies from different racial backgrounds born on any given day have no animosity between them. The fact that they might somewhere down the road have some sort of contention between them is society's fault. It's not theirs. I've seen this in my own kids. They didn't see themselves as being different from their Vietnamese peers. They were just kids, all of them, and they played together. They loved each other. Sowell, himself a black man, uses this observation to argue against reparations for slavery. This has become a hot topic as a San Francisco reparations board has passed recommendations recently that every eligible black person in San Francisco should receive $5 million in reparations for slavery. And according to the Associated Press, the monetary reparations would also include the elimination of personal debt and tax burdens, guaranteed annual incomes of at least $97,000 for 250 years, and homes in San Francisco for just $1 a family. These are non-binding recommendations at the moment. Not sure what will ultimately become of it, but there are many, many problems with proposals such as this, the least of which is that California was never even a slave state. But that's beside the point, I guess. It's basically saying that this baby, born today, who hasn't done anything wrong on its own, will be required to be responsible for this other baby, also born today, even though you've never even interacted before. There's a reason why the race grievance industry in America ignores Thomas Sowell, because his facts and his research counter their narratives. But before you make up your mind about reparations, I strongly urge you to read Sowell's book, Discrimination and Disparities. It will provide much fodder for thought, that's for sure. But I also want to think about this issue in the context of Vietnam. What if the little kid, Bim Bim, whom my daughter played with as a child, what if his parents held my daughter responsible for the actions of American soldiers during the Vietnam War? What if my daughter had to make amends to him because she just so happened to be an American and he just so happened to be a Vietnamese, to no fault or credit of either of them? What would this accomplish except to build a divide between friends which didn't exist before? The past is never healed by living there. Vietnam has learned this lesson. They have burst into the future, and while the effects of a devastating war might linger for generations, they have learned that the choices they make in the present are far more important to their future than the politics of the past. Now, there's actually one more unrelated point I'd like to bring out. Thinking back upon how my kids grew up made me see some parallels to my own upbringing, even though our experiences couldn't have been more different. Their childhood in Vietnam had some of the same freedoms that I had when I was growing up in Pennsylvania. They left the house without warning to play with the neighborhood kids. I would do the same. I would say, "Bye, Mom," zoom out on my bike, into the woods, walking the railroad tracks. I'd be gone for hours and would suddenly show up and ask what's for dinner. There was no way to contact me, but no one worried. We were in a small community that looked out for each other, much the same way my kids experienced in Thanh Nguyen. It's the type of thing which seems unheard of today. Kids must have cell phones. Their parents must know where they are precisely 24/7. Kids don't wander off on their own. Even neighbors may not even know each other like they did in the past. We don't trust people like we used to. I know I don't. If I'm watching my grandchild, I'm not going to let him out of my sight. I think about the what ifs a lot. Does media deserve some of the blame? You hear today not only about what happens in our own community, but what happens around the country and even around the world. We have instilled fear into our kids and also into our parents. And I'm not saying that caution isn't warranted or even that all fear is illogical, but it says something about society and how it's changed. We have more communications now than ever, but we have less trust because of it. Is it moral decay, whether perceived or real? Or is it something else? Communities don't feel as close-knit as they used to. Maybe it's as simple as there are more single-parent households, and even households with two parents are typically both working parents, leaving the house empty longer per week. My mother never worked outside the home. So as a kid, I always knew that no matter how many hours I was outside playing, there would always be someone waiting for me when I got home. That makes a huge difference. I feel blessed that my kids grew up overseas. They've learned to be independent. They've learned to be accepting of those who are different from them. They've learned to work hard for what they want. They value community and friends. They've learned how to eat diverse foods, which in the long run may be the most important point of all. Singing communist songs didn't taint them from being American or seeing positive traits of our country. It may have, in fact, helped them see what an amazing country the United States actually is. This is Mark Sasse for the Crossing Ideas podcast. My next episode, episode 12, will close out season 1 of the podcast. And this episode is called You Never Leave Vietnam nor America. Thanks for listening. Make sure to subscribe. Introduce this podcast to others who might enjoy it. And once again, thank you for your support.